Hello, welcome to all of you. This is our 7th session, and in this session we will try to discern what is the Christian position with relation to creation and the care of the environment. I suggest that we start our investigation from the Bible, from the sources of our theology, from the Bible. Every good theological investigation starts with the Bible. So let's see what the Bible has to say about this. Well, in Genesis 1, we obviously read about the creation of the world. God creates the entire universe and then last creates human beings. So in Genesis 1, the 28th verse, we read, God blessed them, that is the man and the woman, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Now, I'd like to draw your attention on the language that is used in this verse. Subdue the earth, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over creation. Obviously, this language can be problematic. And in fact, the great medieval scholar, Lynn Townsend White Jr., the American medieval scholar, wrote in 1967 a rather seminal work at this regard. And he said that Christianity is actually responsible for the ecological crisis that we are living through in our times. We shall continue to have a worsening ecological crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve man. Now, his point is, if human beings think that creation is their dominion, they are to subdue it and lord it over it, then clearly Christianity is responsible for the ecological crisis. Now, a lot of Christians have since responded to Townsend White, saying, actually, your reading of the Christian texts is not particularly fair. And so a lot of Christian theology has focused since on the concept of stewardship. Stewardship as taking care of creation. Now, this is the statement of the Church of England Board of Social Responsibility, issued in 1991. We all share and depend on the same world, with its finite and often non-renewable resources. Christians believe that this world belongs to God by creation, redemption, and sustenance, and that he has entrusted it to humankind made in his image and responsible to him. We are in the position of stewards, whether or not we acknowledge this responsibility. So, as I said, a lot of theology responded to Townsend White's claim that actually it is not his reading is not fair. The reading in Genesis actually implies a source of stewardship, looking after, taking care of creation. However, reading that statement, a lot of theologians said, actually, this statement is also problematic. This statement is also incomplete. If we think of stewardship in terms of a benevolent Lord, then the concept lacks specific context. What is this benevolent Lord supposed to do? Is he or she supposed to be a hands-on curator or a hands-off operator? Are we to actively tend creation and make sure that every single fruit fly, for example, is preserved? Or let it just be? Let nature be itself? So the concept of stewardship might sound promising at first, but actually, when you zoom in, you need to specify the kind of context and the kind of meaning that you associate with that function. Also, it overstates, according to some, the role of humans in the stewardship of creations. In fact, do humans have the knowledge or the wisdom itself to be stewards? And if so, how? Because you see, if humanity is a good steward by nature, then we need to assume that this transcends cultures, it transcends time, it transcends space. Or is it by grace? So it's the activity and the persuasive activity of the Holy Spirit that grafts us into Christ, that allows us to be stewards of creation. You see, James Lovelock, the great scientist, the great British scientist, actually makes a point which is quite interesting. He says, the idea that humans are yet intelligent enough to serve as stewards of the earth is among the most hubristic ever. We are not more qualified to be stewards or developers of the earth than are goats to be gardeners. Now, he's coming obviously from an atheistic point of view, but he's saying there is no such thing as a good steward. Humans are not by nature good stewards. We don't actually. We're not qualified to be good stewards. What qualifies us to be good stewards of creation? We're as qualified to be good stewards of creation as goats to be good gardeners. Obviously, meaning it can't be. Also, according to some theologians, the statement from the Church of England Board of Social Responsibility and similar statements that have been made since understate the role of God in creation, because you see, the Bible tells us that yes, humans have been given this stewardship task over creation, but God is constantly involved in his creation in ways that have nothing to do with humans, as well as in ways that do. But for example, Christians claim that God is in charge of the development and the evolution of life. So the development of life has nothing to do with humans, and statements such as the one proposed actually understates the role of God. So let's see if we can approach the question through a different standpoint. Now, if you read the passage in Genesis 1, then there is a repeated refrain every day, and God saw that it was good. It was evening, it was morning, first day, it was evening, it was morning, the second day. But there is this constant refrain, and God saw that it was good. And this statement conveys a sense of divine approbation. Creation, God looks at it and likes it and says, yes, that's good. Creation is fundamentally good. It's a good creation of a good God. And the intensified refrain at the end in Genesis 1:31, and God saw that it was very good. It conveys, seals that approval. It conveys a sense that the highest good resides in the idea of interconnectedness, interdependence of the whole creation. Creation, when it's taken as a whole, altogether, yes, is very good. God gives the approval and seals that approval. So, according to the Genesis narrative, what is the human place in creation? Well, we have already quoted the much criticized passage. Fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion. But not many, perhaps at first glance, it's not as immediate. But humans are not the only one category to whom God has given a task of ruling. If you read a few verses before, God says that he creates the sun, that he created the sun and the moon to rule over the day and the night. So actually, humans are one of two categories of creatures to whom God gives the special task of ruling. Then we need to understand quite well what this ruling means. How is this ruling task to be understood? Well, if we look at the two words above, fill the earth and subdue it, and then have dominion, these are two specific Hebrew words. Kabash on one hand, and rada on the other. Now, kabash is the verb that is used in the Old Testament conquest narratives, for example, the taking possession of the land, but it's not the verb that describes the act of conquest itself, but it's the verb that is used in order to show to clarify the activity of making the land work, making the land function once the conquest has taken place. In fact, elsewhere in the Old Testament, this same verb is used of animals, trees, even the land itself thriving, growing, being blessed in its own environment. So the command to engage in kabash is not unique to human beings, but when it's applied to human beings, it refers to, for example, agriculture, an activity that enables human flourishing and growth. So notice the parallel in Genesis 1, fill the earth. So the idea of ruling, subduing it, is not an idea of lording it over, is an idea of make the earth work, make it function, and thrive with it. And when we go and read have dominion, rada, this is a leadership word, a word that does seem to have a vertical dimension, but it is what we may call a contested word, a word that invites us to ask to what extent we are fulfilling the highest value and virtue of leadership. The word is, in fact, associated with instances of harsh and domineering leadership in the Old Testament, but this is always contested, such that we are invited to consider the nature and virtue of that leadership. For example, there is a passage in Ezekiel where the leaders of the people of Israel should have ruled, and the word rada is used again, with compassion. But instead, they are condemned because they are ruling, rada, again, with harshness. That's in Ezekiel 34:4. So this ruling is not to be understood as lording over, but as a virtue, a dominion with compassion. The dominion that God entrusts to human beings, therefore, is within the context of unity with other creatures. So make the land work, kabash, thrive with it, and offered as a virtue to be attained rather than a harsh or despotic rule, such as perhaps Lynn White had in mind. Let's look now at the second creation account. In fact, not many people perhaps remember that in the Old Testament there are two creation accounts, and in the New Testament there is a third creation account. So we need to take the second creation account certainly into mind when we read the Judeo-Christian understanding of creation. Now, we read in Genesis 2, 7th verse, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Now, if you look at this, the verse emphasizes by means of a pun, God forms Adam, the man in Hebrew is Adam, from the dust of the ground, Adamah. So there is actually a pun that emphasizes in this one short verse humans' kinship with the earth. So actually the second creation account develops the theme that we have said above of subduing and ruling as different from lording over, and actually emphasizes that by putting a further emphasis on the kinship of the human beings created with the earth. And so God formed man from the dust of the ground. He forms Adam from Adamah. If we were to translate, it's difficult to translate this little puns into modern English, for example. But if we, I was scratching my brain earlier, how can we translate it? How can we translate? And I found someone who had suggested God made humans out of humus, which is the humus of the earth, the Latin word for the fertile soil. That could give us an idea, but this is the kind of kinship that this verse emphasizes. And then the story in Genesis moves on. The harmonious relationship of Eden has been broken down. The relationships of humanity, of Adam and Eve, there in Eden, living in peace and harmony with the rest of nature, have broken down, obviously. And if you read after the Adam and Eve have been cast out of the earthly paradise, the story emphasizes that humans have failed to exercise their rule correctly. So yes, they have ruled the earth, but they have ruled it with harshness. And God obviously sees the sin of humans, and the story of the flood is the next episode. And Noah is the symbol of the one who walked with God, Genesis 6:8. And what does Noah do? Noah, who walks with God, as opposed to the rest of his generation that is destroying, failing creation. Well, Noah takes care of the animals, of course. So Noah is a symbol of the one who walks with God, where this relationship of subduing and ruling actually is the relationship as it was intended, care for the animals in this case. And now the post-flood narratives, there is a degree of accommodation with the non-ideal. For example, human beings are given are permitted to eat meat, but still with the proviso that they do not eat the blood of the animal. They cannot consume the life of the living creature. So even there, yes, you can make use of creation, but creation has something beyond it that you're not allowed to take. So the Noahide covenant is made with the whole creation, and God says, I set my bow amongst the clouds. So there is a Noahide covenant made with the whole of creation. So there is an emphasis, even in the post-flood narratives, where we see a slight accommodation with the non-ideal, there is still the emphasis on the fact that the covenant with Noah is a covenant with all creation. If we move on with in the Old Testament, we see the law of Israel and emphasizing the community of creation. Now, this is very evident in the Mosaic law, particularly as concerning the law of the Sabbath. You see, God in creation rested on the Sabbath. And so human beings are asked to do the same. The seventh day is a day of rest, a day of renewal for the land. And not just that, so not just a weekly Sabbath, but there is a sabbatical year every 7 years. So just like every seventh day there is a Sabbath, every seventh year there is a Sabbath. And every seventh set of 7 years, there is a Sabbath. So the Jubilee, the Sabbath of Sabbath, is the 50th year, which is the seventh sabbatical year, which is an extra sabbatical year after the seventh sabbatical year. So there is one extra Sabbath there. The idea is that you need to let the land rest, you need to give freedom, there is this understanding of community with creation. And this continues clearly in the tradition of the Psalms. Now, with all of this in mind, What is the Christian position with respect to creation, with respect to the environment, with respect to the care of the environment, with respect to the ecology? What is the Christian position? What are we supposed to do then from a Christian perspective, and not just because we are pushed into different corners from societal points of view? Either we need to look after the animal, or let's keep going. Here we come. In 2015, Pope Francis wrote the encyclical letter Laudato Si. And what he does is he takes the Canticle of the Creatures from St. Francis. His question is, what is our relationship as Christians with the natural world? And he uses the words of the Canticle of the Creatures of St. Francis. Praise be, may you be praised, my Lord, for our sister Earth, our brother Sun, and so on. And in the first two paragraphs, at the very beginning of this encyclical, Pope Francis sets out what the Christian position with respect to the care of the environment should be. And I've written it out because it's worth quoting in full and worth reading in full. In the words of this beautiful canticle, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life. So the earth is our sister. We share something. Do you remember kinship with the air, with the earth from the second creation account? And a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. So a land that we subdue in the sense that we make it work, on a land on which we thrive, because this land is our mother. This sister now cries out to us, this sister, this mother, you see, kinship, now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her. Once again, the rule has not been, the rule that we have inflicted upon this earth has not been a rule in which we thrive together with the earth. It has been a harsh rule, a lording it over rule. So this sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, so no longer a relation of kinship here, entitled to plunder her at will. The violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness. So you see here again, this follows the story of Genesis. After the fall, the violence of humanity is destroying this relationship with the earth so much that the flood happens. And Noah, the one who walks with God, is the one who looks after creation, who looks after the animals. So the violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is now resulting in us abusing the earth. This is why the earth herself, burdened and laid waste, is among the most abandoned and maltreated of our poor, and she groans in travail. So here Pope Francis is taking the words of St. Francis and referring it back to the Genesis account. Therefore, what should we do? Well, an awareness of the gravity of today's cultural and ecological crisis must be translated, must be reflected in new habits that we take up. So Pope Francis writes in paragraph 217, the ecological crisis is a summon to a profound interior conversion. So what do we do at this point? Since the harshness of our rule has made the earth poor and maltreated because we've been violent, and that's the consequence of sin, what is the solution? What is the Christian position? Pope Francis says, conversion to Christ. It must be said that some committed and prayerful Christians, with the excuse of realism and pragmatism, tend to ridicule expressions of concern for the environment. Others are passive. They choose not to change their habits, and thus they become inconsistent. So what they all need is an ecological conversion. You need to turn to Christ. And by turning to Christ, we realize what our relationship with nature is as well, whereby the effects of their encounter with Jesus Christ become evident in their relationship with the world around them. So, what do we need to do? Well, the best way to restore nature is to put an end to claim that human beings are absolute dominant rulers over the earth, and instead put an emphasis on the fact that of our kinship, understand all creatures, both human and non-human, as moving together. And so as we realize that our rule over nature has not been the one that God had intended, to which the virtue to which we had been called, then our response can only be conversion to Christ. And as we convert to Christ, as we turn to Christ, we also realize our place in nature, and we relate with it in a different way by caring for the environment. Now, okay, fine. The biblical account is not exactly what Lynn White made of it. The biblical emphasis is slightly different. Okay, we agree, but why should we care? Is it because perhaps society has banked on long enough about the care of the environment and the fact that we are spoiling the environment, and we just want to show that we too, as the church, are relevant, when in reality we might just be taking our cue from secular society? Or are we looking at the Genesis task entrusted to us as a mere command from God? Therefore, we just need to obey it. God says, look after creation, then we just need to do it. And it's a command of God, and we do it. It happens to be a wholesome command, but it could be equally unwholesome. It's a command of God. God says it, we do it. Or is there a more fundamental question, and therefore a more fundamental reason that we need to look for? Tell me, why should we care? Why is this important? Why should we care about the book of nature? I'll see you in class.